In my last video of this series, I discussed the motivations for and complications of standardized testing. It's easy to understand why a government funding a public education system wants to regulate its productivity through linear data. It's nearly as easy to understand that attempting to relegate data like how much each student learns or how much each teacher influences them into spreadsheets of numbers based on standardized tests is simply ineffective. Let's consider alternative assessments for students and evaluation for teachers that solve this issue without the often called upon alternatives of privatized education or homeschooling. Let's start with how student knowledge should be assessed. Teachers tend to wrestle with the necessity and complication that come with stamping a grade onto each of their students for every assignment they do. There's far too much emphasis in modern education on grades. The number of students who are more concerned with achieving a high grade than with obtaining new applicable knowledge is staggering. That's why so many students will cheat on assignments rather than doing them. When students leave school with technical and social skills, improved base knowledge, and so forth, it means very little to most parents and other establishments if that student doesn't have a report card or a transcript to prove his or her knowledge. This is a fundamental flaw in priority, though the fact remains that at the end of the day, student progress needs to be manifested into some form of numeric or alphabetic representation. A primary solution to accurately assessing student comprehension comes in the way of formative assessment. That means getting back to assessing students to actually see what they learn rather than assessing them because they need to be graded somehow, and checking for understanding during the lesson, not just afterwards. Students can be assessed by writing essays after selecting from a variety of prompts. They can give speeches, film videos, write poems or songs, create web pages, act things out, or ask relevant questions to demonstrate a base understanding of information given by discussing what information was withheld. These are just some methods for assessing children beyond a bubble sheet. Students with the most options for how they can best show what they've learned display that knowledge the most effectively. They're also far more motivated to learn material if they find it useful or interesting and know that their knowledge will be assessed accurately rather than just conveniently. This requires a lot more initial work for teachers who have gotten comfortable with their Scantron tests, Xerox worksheets, and questions from textbooks, but many other parts of their jobs become much easier when dealing with motivated students. That brings us to the evaluation of teachers. As students must receive some kind of grade at the end of their courses, it's far more accurate to leave those marks up to the teachers who work with them every day than it is to defer the majority of that mark to a single test at the end of the course. However, state governments have decided that the best way to evaluate teachers is to observe the grades their students receive, particularly in comparison to years past. For teachers to be evaluated based on the grades they give their students, something obviously had to change for the interest of fairness and accuracy. What they should have changed was how teachers were evaluated, rather than how students were scored. The most effective method for teacher evaluation is not student grades, as the grading process is already far too subjective and flawed as a measurement for learning to begin with, even with the use of formative tools. If you can't accurately assess employees based on production during their shifts, then you have to assess them based on observation. In the state where I work, teachers in their first 3 years need to be observed 8 times per year, and those who've been teaching longer only need 2 per year. Teachers know these observations will be few and far between, as well as irrelevant when compared to test scores. That breeds complacency in workers who are already bogged down with impossible job descriptions. For many, it leads to only giving a full effort during class while they're being observed. Why would overwhelmed and underpaid employees go the extra mile to make rigorous and relevant lessons for each individual class when they could just copy worksheets from a book? It's not like administration cares as long as the test scores are decent. I submit that teachers should be observed every day during every class. In an ideal school, there would be 2 cameras and microphones in every classroom that provide live feeds for administrators and parents to watch at any time during school. We're in a technological age that lends itself perfectly to recording every lesson for self-review for teachers. This would leave parents with a recorded lesson to help their students with their homework, students under the constant surveillance of their own parents, and gives the administrator a pure system of accountability for how teachers operate their classes. Under the current system, students and teachers behave much differently when an administrator walks in the classroom for an observation. It's just too great of a variable for a fair experiment. The education system needs a complete overhaul to meet its true potential, but these are just some steps we can take right now to at least start steering it in the right direction.